Hello, I'm Mridula Mukherjee, and I'm going to be speaking today on the death anniversary of. It is very obvious that since we are unable to meet in person, we are unable to do things publicly, we have now gone digital, hoping that we can still keep the spirit of the discussion and the spirit of the times alive before this virtual audience. It's a new experience, so bear with me. Uh, I'm a teacher and I'm used to talking to at least a class full of students, if not a hall full of people. So talking into a camera is not exactly something that I'm very comfortable with, but I will try. Bhagat Singh, let me begin with a brief biography of Bhagat Singh, as many of our younger people, particularly, may not know too much about his background. Bhagat Singh was born in a village in Punjab, and here he had a very interesting legacy in that his uncle, his father's brother, Ajit Singh, was a revolutionary of considerable standing who had participated in the anti boycott, participated in the anti British movement in Punjab from 1905 to 1907, which was part of the whole upsurge, the Swadeshi movement, as part of the whole upsurge against the partition of Bengal. Set off in Bengal, but then it spread to Maharashtra and to Punjab as well in a very big way. His father, also Sardar Kishan Singh, was a nationalist, member of the Congress. And of course, Ajit Singh was a very well known figure, a close associate of Lala Lajpat Rai as well. And in fact, he was deported, he was exiled as a result of his participation in the Swadeshi movement. So, coming from that legacy, it is understandable that as a very young child, he imbibed these feelings, anti British feelings, revolutionary feelings, through his family. Only that can explain how, as a very young boy of about 13 years old, he had come to Amritsar and he participated in the then ongoing non cooperation movement, which was also associated with the then ongoing Akali movement. And one of the things which they had done was to boycott foreign cloth and to burn foreign cloth. And that was one of the first political acts of Bhagat Singh, was to participate as a very young boy or adolescent boy in this movement. And obviously this radicalized him in a very big way, because within a year or two, by the age of about 15, we begin to see that here was a young boy who was becoming very revolutionary, very radical, very anti British, and also exploring the ideas of the time. So, emerging out of the non cooperation movement by about 1924, 1925, Bhagat Singh links up with the new ideas of revolution, which were being promoted by small groups of young men in different parts of the country. There was a group which was based in UP, led by Ram Prasad Bismil, Chandrasekhar Azad, who had founded the Hindustan Revolutionary Army or the Hindustan Revolutionary Association, which was a kind of secret society of young men who wanted to fight against the British using, if necessary, violent means. This group then, over time, they were the first ones who undertook a very famous robbery called the Kakori Robbery, in which they looted the treasury in a train that was going uh, very close to Lucknow. And then they became famous for that, and then their popularity spread to large numbers of people. Bhagat Singh was associated with this group. Now, interestingly, this group, though they themselves were espousing the use of violence, very quickly they were also overcoming that attachment attachment to violence and began to talk about how it was necessary to take part in the mass movements that were going on, and how violence, if at all, was to be used only as utter necessity. And in this, Ram Prasad Bismil, Chandrasekhar Azad, they were the leaders. In fact, Ram Prasad Bismil was, as you know, hanged, and he had sent a note from jail in which he said that how he believed that it was not necessary to take to violent means, but we must participate in the ongoing mass movement, and that is the way for the future. But what was very important ideologically was that this group, of which Bhagat Singh had become a part and a leading part, they now became very radical in the revolutionary sense of what kind of society they wanted. Earlier, it was the idea was you throw out the British and you establish in place of British rule and indigenous rule, but the issues of exploitation within Indian society and what would be the kind of future society had not really been raised within the revolutionary movement. Even within the Congress movement at that time, the broad anti imperialist movement, these were ideas that were just coming up. So, this group was very radical in that very soon they started talking in terms of having socialism as an objective. They started saying that independence could not be just political independence, it had to include social independence, it had to include economic independence, and this became the path through which they then moved towards a objective of a socialist revolution. So they now began to see their activities as part of a larger battle against all forms of exploitation and not just against British rule. So this is a very interesting aspect of this movement of which Bhagat Singh was a leading part. I want to now just take a little detour to say that one of the remarkable things about Bhagat Singh, which we need to recall, is that he was an intellectual par excellence. His intellectual qualities have been remarked upon by scholars who have studied him, most notably Professor Bipin Chandra, who brought his writings to the general public, especially his famous article, Why I Am an Atheist, where he displays an extraordinary quality of critical critical analysis for a young man who was only 23 when he died, and most of his intellectual activity is before that period, between the ages of 15, 16 to 23. That maturity and complexity of thought which he displays, and the rapidity with which he was changing his ideas also is remarkable. Because, as you know, there is a tendency, especially among activists, once you have gotten hold of certain ideas and you have invested in them, you develop a kind of vested interest and refuse to move away from them. It's like your capital. Bhagat Singh had this remarkable quality to change. As he came across new ideas, he was more than willing to explore them and change. So I want to point out here that Bhagat Singh was an avid reader. It is said of him that he always had his pockets bulging with books, and whenever he actually went to any meeting or to any place where he was meeting other comrades, he would carry books with him and he would keep pressing them on them and saying, read, read, read. You cannot have a revolution without thought. So this was a remarkable quality, not just of him, but of many of his contemporaries also. Ram Prasad Bismil, Vora, Chandrasekhar Azad, so many of them, Ajay, Bijoy Sinha, all of whom were very fine intellectuals. And the fact, because usually revolutionaries are described as men of action as opposed to those who just do talking. But there is no such contradiction that we find among the Indian revolutionaries. They believed that revolution could only be brought about if you also indulged in deep and critical thought and engaged yourself with the latest ideas and the best ideas that were available. This is also the reason that they were able to overcome, in a sense, what one could call the limitations of the early revolutionary movement of the previous 2 decades, where there was a glorification, or you could say a kind of romantic attachment to the use of violence, to a point where they could actually see what was happening around them. They could see how Gandhi and the broad anti imperialist movement was actually shaking the foundations of British rule through the use of non violent mass movements. And they confronted these ideas, and they tried to come to grips with them and try to see whether there was something that was uh, great over there which they needed to absorb into their thinking. So we find that towards the latter period, Ram Prasad Bismil, Chandrasekhar Azad, notably Bhagat Singh, uh, before his death, for example, in very clear cut terms, he says, there is a statement which he made in February 1931 where he says, I never was a terrorist. If I was, it was only in the very, very early period of my political career. I am not a terrorist and I never was. And I do not believe in violent methods. So we believe in a revolution, and he, in fact, urged people to join the broad revolutionary movement that was going on then in India against the British. It is also very important for us to remember, and this is again another aspect of Bhagat Singh which is not talked about enough. And I think in today's context, where in fact communalism has re-emerged, I would say, as a major problem, as it had in the time of Bhagat Singh. You know, the 1920s, which is actually the period of Bhagat Singh's political activism, the main period, because by 31, by 29 he was in jail, and 31 he is hanged. So the real active period of his political activism, I would say, is the decade of the 20s. Many of you would remember this was also the period when, for the first time on a large scale, mass communal riots broke out in India. Uh, I don't want to go into what the reasons for that were, though some reason could be pointed out. This was the first time that elections at somewhat of a mass level were held under the system of separate electorates, in which different communities had candidates. The candidates belonged to a particular community, the voters belonged to a particular community. There wasn't a common electorate, even. The British had set up this pernicious system which ultimately led to partition. So it is in the 20s that India, for the first time, faces this kind of situation, and Bhagat Singh was right there at his most perceptive, at his most active, at his sharpest. In fact, one of his big heroes, being from Punjab, was Lala Rajpat Rai, who was an ardent nationalist, a comrade of his uncle Ajit Singh. But Bhagat Singh felt, and rightly so, that around the period 1925, 26, 27, Lala Rajpat Rai was showing some communal tendencies in his ideology and politics, even though he was a great nationalist, the Lion of the Punjab, as he was called. So Bhagat Singh, even though he was so young, you can imagine what he was not even 20 yet, had the courage to actually criticize, though in a very polite and very innovative way, Lala Lajpat Rai for the fact that he was showing these communal tendencies. And equally important, or as important, Bhagat Singh was the founder of an organization in Punjab called the Naujawan Bharat Sabha, which was supposed to be the open wing of the Revolutionary Party, through which they wanted to reach out to peasants and to the youth. In fact, they even participated in the Students' Union elections over there in Punjab, and they went around to the rural areas, he and his comrades, giving what they were, it was that night they were called these magic lantern lectures to the peasants, in which they took the basic ideas of egalitarianism, secularism, socialism to the ordinary people. Now, one of the very interesting things was that this Naujawan Bharat Sabha, which he and his comrades set up in 1926-27, this was the period they were active over there before the Saunders murder occurs, before the Simon Commission boycott. This is the period where they are very active. It was one of the rules of the Naujawan Bharat Sabha that anybody who is a member of any communal organization could not become a member of the Naujawan Bharat Sabha. And the organization was fully committed to secularism and against communalism. This is, of course, I'm giving you proof of his ideas. But I also want to say that Bhagat Singh was very prescient in that he looked upon communalism, which was, as I said, it had just emerged as a major problem before Indian society and Indian politics. He was so quick to see its future potential and future danger for the country that he said that communalism is as dangerous an idea, it is as dangerous a political force as colonialism. Now, there were very few people at that time who had that wisdom or that prescient sense, because it was thought that the biggest danger before India was colonialism, which it was. And there was also a strong feeling among even the most radical of the anti imperialist leaders and fighters that once the British go, since they were rightly thought to be the originators of the divide and rule policy, originators of pitting Hindu against Muslim, Sikh against Muslim, Sikh against Hindu, and untouchable against caste Hindus, the whole policy of divide and rule. Once they go, these problems would disappear. What people did not realize was that the ideas which they are promoting and the political forms which they are setting up, the governance forms, the legislative forms, the institutions like separate electorates, which they are setting up, institutions like reservations on religious lines in schools and colleges and jobs, which they are setting up, these will not go away overnight. This pernicious legacy would remain with us. And therefore, when Bhagat Singh could actually at that young age see that communalism was as big a danger as colonialism, one needs to say hats off to that young man who had such a profound understanding. I think one of the reasons for that was that though Bhagat Singh was a revolutionary of a particular type, where you tended to work in small groups and secret groups, etc. But if you see his trajectory, he was always in touch with the masses, right from the time of non-cooperation movement when he participates in the boycott of foreign cloth, Naujawan Bharat Sabha, going to the students, going to the workers, going to the peasants. I think it was his link with the people, link with the grassroots, what was happening in India at that time, that also gave him the capacity to have these insights, which this is not belittling his intellectual powers, but many people can have very fine intellectual powers, but if they don't have a grasp of what's actually going on at those layers of society where the dynamics of change are to be located, then they often miss out, no matter on that reality, on that complexity, no matter how brilliant their ideas may be. And I think that's one reason Bhagat Singh had that kind of a grasp of Indian society. We also know that in his very famous essay, which I'm sure others would also be talking about, Why I Am an Atheist, Bhagat Singh not just demonstrated his fantastic intellectual qualities, but what he also revealed a very uh, interesting sense of, you know, of mass psychology. For example, when he is talking about the effect of religion and the role of religion in people's lives, it's quite fascinating that while on the one hand he is very critical of religion as being something that obfuscates our a capacity to understand what's going on, and it is deviates from that, etc., he also says at the same time that religion has the other aspect of being the solace of the poor, of being the heart of for a heartless society. And here, in a way, he was perhaps paraphrasing, or maybe he was influenced by what he might have read from Marx, who also talked about religion in this dual way, criticizing the impact of religion and the role of religion, but at the same time trying to understand why is it that people take to religion? What is it in their lives that makes them take to it? And from there, then Bhagat Singh says that though I am now facing death, the gallows are hanging before me. Many people thought and they said that as death comes closer, you will take to religion. You will seek solace in religion. You will want some crutch, something to lean on in order to take you through this terrible ordeal of actually knowing that your death is coming. And he says in this article that, and though this is what was said to me by so many people, but I find that is not so. I do not have not started believing in religion, but in fact, he writes this article with a very interesting title where he proclaims that he's an atheist and tries to explain why he's an atheist. So he espouses a whole rational understanding. Again, very important for us today. The whole notion of scientific temper, which Jawaharlal Nehru tried to spread, which he is even there as a constitutional value for India. It's very much on the same lines of taking your stand on the basis of, of rationalism and rationality and saying, that is why I'm an atheist, because I think the phenomenon that we see around the world can be explained through science, can be explained through other means. We do not have to rely on the notion of a creator or a supernatural figure in order to understand what's going on around us. And we can get moral courage, as he was showing how he had the moral courage. You can get the moral courage to face adversity through values and principles which you can derive from other sources. There are other ethical sources in society from which a human being can draw those resources. Religion is not the only source from which you can derive the courage and derive the strength to keep straight, to keep ethical, to choose the right path. So there are very interesting aspects to this article on why I am an atheist, apart from what is available on the surface. I also want to mention that uh, the issue of caste and untouchability, caste discrimination, was something which Bhagat Singh was concerned about. Again, this is quite unusual because, as you know, there were yet, in a sense, the struggle against caste was still in the future politically. Gandhiji also started his mass campaign against untouchability when he comes out of jail in 1932 after the pact with Ambedkar. Then he goes on a mass campaign where he visits villages and hamlets and towns and streets all over India. Incessantly for 9 months, he's on a tour countering untouchability. But this is in the future. At the time that Bhagat Singh is talking about, even though Gandhiji had made the struggle against untouchability, essential part of the Congress program from the days of non-cooperation movement in 1920, it was not yet a mass phenomenon. Yes, some struggles had broken out, particularly in South India, but still, I think we need to recognize again the quality, the futuristic quality of Bhagat Singh's thought, where he was able to locate and put his finger on this as a major problem of Indian society. So, along with the struggle against against colonialism, he brings in the struggle against communalism. He brings in the struggle against casteism as major ideologies and political formations, political institutions which they have spawned, which have to be struggled against. All this, I think, taken together, along with his bravery, his courage, his personality, which again I think we need to talk about maybe a little bit before I conclude. All contemporaries testify to him having an extremely attractive and charming, winsome personality. A very good looking young man, as very few photographs that have survived show. But apart from that, apparently he was always full of laughter, he was always full of jokes. When he went into any company, the spirits lifted. For him, revolution was not some pain in the neck. It was a joyful task, one that brought happiness, being engaged in the process of revolution, being engaged in the task of fighting for a better world for others as well as for yourself, was something that was joyful. I think this is something again that's quite remarkable in the annals of our freedom struggle. We do not find very in among the top leadership, also among the workers also of the anti-imperialist movement, very self-righteous people who think they are doing a great service to humanity by undertaking political work. On the contrary, you find people who take things very lightly and or brush off and say, what did we do? We did what came our way. We did what we had to. We did what was our duty over then and enjoyed themselves in the process. Jawaharlal Nehru is another person who writes about this, that how it was, as he says, quoting the famous comment about the Russian Revolution, that how it was bliss to be alive at such a glorious time. Same for Gandhiji. He was always smiling. He was always cracking jokes. He was always in good humor. He did not take himself seriously. When Sarojini Naidu called him Mickey Mouse, he laughed. He didn't think that there was something wrong in being made fun of. I think this aspect also of treating activism, treating participation in political activity as an act of joy, as something you do because you enjoy it and not because you're doing a favor to others and not because you are God's gift to earth, is something that would be very, very helpful in these very, very trying and very, very sober times. Thank you. বন্ধ করো। How do I shut it? कहाँ है?
Use this.